My name is Kim McCleary. I'm Managing Director of FasterCures, which is one of the 7 centers of the Milken Institute. We focus on identifying and breaking down barriers in the healthcare ecosystem that add time and expense to the process of getting promising therapies from the bench to patients. So it's my pleasure to moderate this panel this morning. We've got an exciting topic for you, one that obviously you've chosen to be here, so you have some interest in, but what we hope to do is maybe give you a little more information about it than you've previously understood, the topic related to the cybersecurity of healthcare data and devices. This is day 3 of the global conference, and so many of you that have been here with us for the week have been asked a lot of questions already. I'm going to start off with 2 more, and then we're going to let the panel kind of unpack this topic for you in a couple of different ways. We'll move into maybe what are some of the solutions to the challenges that this issue presents, then go to you for some question and answer time, and then come back for a lightning round. So that's how we'll spend this next hour together. We'll get you out of here in time to hear President Bush at lunchtime, I promise. So first question is, by a show of hands, how many of you have as some part of your professional responsibilities either risk assessment or risk mitigation in some sense of the word? Okay, great, that's helpful. And the second question is, how many of you have been victims of fire, flood, or natural disaster? Okay, a fair number also. If I could have the first slide, please. So asking about risk is a natural question when you think about the topic of cyber threats. But the second question relates to a 2015 survey of business leaders who had been their victims through their businesses of cyber attacks. And they likened the disruption to their operations of a cyber attack to being the same as fire, flood, or natural disaster. So keep that in mind as we talk about the issues up here on the panel. And when we think about the vulnerability of healthcare data and devices, the stakes are pretty high. And we've got a great group of folks that are going to help you understand why that is. First of all, on my immediate right, I've got Kevin McDonald, who's on the front lines as the Chief Information Security Officer at the Mayo Clinic. Suzanne Schwartz from the FDA's Center for Devices and Radiologic Health. We've got Mark Wilson, who's given me a new personal goal to strive for with his title as Chief Evangelist at Blackberry. Someday I too want to be a Chief Evangelist. And then last but not least on the end, Josh Corman, who comes to us with his experience as a cyber terror expert at the Atlantic Council and also as a passionate activist through his organization that he helped to found, I Am the Cavalry. But before we let them talk, I just want to set the scene for you. And if we could look at slide 2, please. We're going to cover a number of different types of cyber threat vulnerabilities. One involves an institution just down the road from here where hackers used malware to infiltrate this particular healthcare institution, Hollywood Presbyterian, to gain control of the medical records and the information systems of the hospital. They extorted from the hospital ransom of $17,000. Now, to many of you in this room, that's kind of chump change, a rounding error of some kind. But what you may not think about was the disruption of the operations of that hospital for the time that they were under cyber threat. Patient care was delayed, the operating rooms had to be shut down, ambulances being sent to the hospital were diverted to other places, and that was just one day. This scenario plays out in healthcare settings all around the country every week. And in the course of our panel prep, we discovered that while 3 of these folks know each other, and Mark and I are a little bit the outsiders on this topic, there was one particular scenario that actually brought all of them together. And it's another illustration of a different kind of cyber vulnerability. And Mark, you're going to start us off with just a brief story about what Blackberry did and how Josh's team and Suzanne's team came into the picture too.
So just to kind of set the stage of Blackberry. So as maybe many of you know, or maybe some of you know, Blackberry over the last 3 years has transitioned from a hardware company into a software company. So we're now a $1 billion software company. we have partners that manufacture devices, but that's not exactly what we do. But as part of that transition, we looked at what do we do incredibly well and what's in our DNA, which is all about security and scalable systems. And from that, we pivoted into enterprise software and particularly around security. So every year we have a security summit in New York City, and we like to hack things as part of that. So we actually have a group that we had acquired of white hat hackers. And so these are the guys that used to be black hat hackers, covered in tattoos, that love to get on stage and just rip things up. So we talked to a customer of ours who's a healthcare provider, and we said, do you have anything we can borrow that we can kind of play with? And they said, well, we have these pumps sitting around. Why don't you take one of these? And we said, okay, that's great. And we sent it over to this group that's based in the UK. And for 2 weeks, they then started playing around with it. And they were able to hack it down to a root level, which meant that they had complete control of that pump. So they could, basically the only way that you could take control back would be to pull it out of the person's arm or turn the machine off. Like there was really no way for somebody to actually get control of that pump back. And what was amazing for us is how quickly it happened. Like for us, within 2 weeks, being able to give it to a bunch of people that they really didn't know much about it, and then actually have them take it down. And every few days we were like, hey, how's it going? Because we're getting close to this event. Hopefully something you're doing is good. And they're like, oh yeah, we're making progress. And they kept making more and more progress. And soon it's like, oh, we took it all the way down to the root. You can't compromise it more than we've compromised it in this 2 week period. So that was a bit alarming in many ways for some of us. We then showed this at this event, and we had the customers in the audience who let us borrow these pumps. And he said, you know, those pumps, they're everywhere in our hospital. Those are the things we send home with people. Like, this is like, we had no idea that they were this easy to compromise. And it was just a bit of a wake-up call, even for this person who was a senior leader in a hospital, to say, oh my goodness, these things really are quite vulnerable.
And what kind of substance are those pumps pumping through people? Like,
oh, it could be anything.
Talking IVs and...
Yeah, they're generic bedside infusion pumps, very popular ones. And not to beat on that particular vendor, if anyone wants to look it up. There's just been a long period where the people designing, developing, and bringing these to market didn't anticipate the hazard of threat actors or accidents and adversaries in cyberspace. But as medicine becomes increasingly dependent on technology, the promise and the peril there is that these will make cures possible. They'll drop the cost of health delivery. They'll improve the level of patient care, and they expose us to new types of accidents and adversaries. So, not knowing you, we had started this group called IamTheCavalry.org. The idea was that we were deeply concerned about the dependence on connected technology that affects public safety and human life. Essentially, where bits and bytes meet flesh and blood. And some researcher friends of ours that were diabetics had almost been killed by their devices malfunctioning. They started looking and found they were equally as easy across a number of device types. One of them in particular, though, was meaningful to catalyzing policy. It was that one of our friends, Billy Rios, former soldier, had hacked a particular medical device, an infusion pump, reported it to the manufacturer and alerted DHS and FDA, and gave that vendor a calendar year to work on it, which is an eon in cybersecurity terms, but it's also probably necessary given the maturity level at the time. And it had long been our belief that we would need to see proof of harm before we would see a regulatory action for cybersecurity reasons. We'd have to see someone injured or killed and proof of it to see something like that. But somewhere in that 365-day window that Billy had given the manufacturer, somebody found a very similar flaw. And I think what that really brought everybody together on is everyone with the best of intentions, if we don't try to align a whole of community approach, if we don't try to align our various complementary skills, we may lose precious time. So I think in earnest after that point, you saw significantly more collaboration with the white hat research community. I come from the hacker community, but we're the good guys. And we wanted to work as teammates with the FDA, with the medical device manufacturers, with hospitals. And ultimately, that particular example, through some of the courage from the FDA, it essentially became a case lesson, because with zero proof of harm, there was a corrective action taken by the regulator on that because there was an unmitigated pathway to harm. And that sent a message to the entire medical device industry that they were going to have to take cybersecurity more seriously sooner than they had anticipated. And while there had been good guidance and Suzanne is better poised to speak about the pre-market guidance versus the post-market guidance. That was a very key moment in the evolution of trying to take the best and brightest from these various stakeholder groups to make us safer sooner if we work together.
So this topic of risk and reward is going to be, pervasive. It's been pervasive in a lot of the panels you've heard over the past few days. We're going to keep coming back to it here. We're at this unprecedented point of opportunity in terms of our medical technology and big data really, having the potential to transform health and health care. But at the same time, we've got these new risks that we have to think about. We've got a greater ability to monitor patient health inside and outside of clinical settings. We've got the opportunity for more data to reflect the very dynamic state of an individual's health and a population's health. But that means connecting a lot of systems that previously weren't. We've got the opportunity for reduced cost of patient care through all of this, and some amazing kind of blow-your-mind technologies, everything from swallowable biosensors to implantable defibrillators and pacemakers and stimulation devices to artificial organs like the new artificial pancreas. But for Kevin, who sits in a healthcare institution and is responsible for the security of these new technologies, tell us what that means to you in terms of weighing and balancing the risks to patient health for the rewards that patient health might bring.
So in a healthcare institution and with physicians, I mean, the risk versus rewards is a conversation that happens millions of times a day. This drug versus that drug, complication of surgery. What we now have had to do is put it in another context. You've added one more variable in there with this. The hard part is how do you phrase it? How do you put it in context of something that you may not have a double-blind study on? Something that may happen but hasn't happened before, the so-called black swan event. And then how do you explain that to the physician? And then how do they deal that into the context of their decision-making on some of the products, some of where's the money spent, and again, even in part of the administration of where do you want to spend your money with your risk versus the rewards. I think the biggest thing that is the difference is that it brings a whole nother level of knowledge and skill sets to the decision makers in healthcare. Physicians now have to, and we regularly engage them in these conversations. Okay, you can buy this or you can buy that. Here's the implications. And then it starts coming with decisions of, if we buy that, which is better patient care, how much better can we make it? And it's quite a discussion and a lot of give and take.
So Suzanne, you're responsible at FDA for regulating 25 cents of every dollar spent on consumer goods throughout the economy. I mean, that's everything from pet food to makeup to drugs and devices and food and tobacco. It's an unbelievable remit that FDA has. You work in the Center for Devices and Radiologic Health, which is everything from tongue depressors to hospital beds to MRI scanners to implanted glucose monitors. So even just in CDRH, you've got a big remit. How do you work with manufacturers for those to think about security by design and improving legacy medical devices that are already in use around the world?
Yeah, great question. And I would start off by saying that, to touch on really where we started off with on the interconnectedness or connectivity and interoperability of medical devices, that we are definitely in a different place today than we were years ago. Many medical devices were built as intended to be standalone devices. Devices today promise and offer a lot more for patients with respect to their care and their well-being beyond the walls of the hospital, but in terms of their ambulatory care, their ability to walk around and to have that remote connectivity to the physician's office, as well as, if you're in the hospital, to the electronic health records and to other devices. And we want to be able to see that ongoing innovation and that technology continue to advance. And yet, this idea, again, of risk versus reward, how do we strike that right balance with respect to devices that today are connected in that manner? They perhaps were not built with that intent. So in the design and the development of those devices years ago, security wasn't necessarily a feature that was considered with the same type of rigor that a manufacturer would look at with respect to safety and effectiveness, the two primary principles by which FDA will regulate devices. But now, that's a critical aspect that needs to be considered by the manufacturer, by the healthcare delivery organization, by physicians, by the FDA as well, because we see that crossroad between where the security or lack thereof of a device, if there is vulnerability that could be exploited, how that might impact on the device's ability to perform safely and effectively. And yet, the challenge there again is in terms of changing the mindset and changing the culture with all of our stakeholders. We often talk about the community of the medical device ecosystem as being a very, very broad and diverse community, and that it really does require a coming together of minds and a shifting of attitudes, because the classical, the traditional way that we think about risk versus reward, or in FDA speak, benefit and risk, the benefit-risk calculus that has to be utilized by all of us as regulators, as physicians, as manufacturers, how you look at risk in this scenario is entirely different than how we classically have looked at risk in the past. Because there is no evidence base to look back on in terms of describing prior events that have occurred. And therefore, it's not just thinking about what the implications are for that device if a vulnerability were to be taken advantage of, but what is the likelihood or the exploitability of that actually happening. And that's a very, very difficult and different way of thinking about things. So there's this evolution towards really trying to change the culture and change the ecosystem, change minds and hearts, if you will. And how have we done that at the FDA? First off, it's in recognizing the aspect of cybersecurity that absolutely requires collaboration across the entire community as a collective. And that starts off with raising awareness and education and outreach and bringing stakeholders to the table that should have a voice that previously have not had a voice in these kinds of discussions, to help influence and to provide expertise in ways that are previously lacking. And through these efforts of collaboration, we at FDA have also been able to then further inform policy. Our policy with respect to what we expect to see from manufacturers in the design of new devices, that the security be built into the design of all those new devices. And that's part of our pre-market guidance. And then most recently with the issuing of what our post-market guidance is. And that's our policy with respect to what we want manufacturers to be doing through the lifetime of that device, from the time that it reaches the patient's bedside, from the time that it's in distribution, all the way out until that device is considered end of life, that it's considered obsolete. So it is a kind of total product life cycle approach, one that warrants manufacturers, healthcare delivery organizations, security researchers, and others really to come together and to work together, public and private sphere.
Great. Mark, you see this from a vantage point of business across many different sectors, and in many ways, healthcare is kind of lagging behind, as it does in other ways, and using big data and busting down data silos. Tell us about what some of the factors are that you think are impeding, and maybe we can see slide 4, because the costs of these vulnerabilities are greater than in other sectors, but we're still kind of lagging behind.
And it is amazing, and so looking at these stats, it's amazing how healthcare does lag, because I'd say healthcare has some of the biggest brains of any industry that's out there, and yet it's systemic in terms of its inability or its ability to be so far behind. I think there's a handful of reasons why it is. I think that Suzanne kind of hit on a few of them. I think one is, if you look at devices, there's so many more devices in healthcare than any other industry. I think there's a statistic, if you look at where the Internet of Things is going, 40% of all Internet of Things devices will be health-related devices. So there's a massive number of devices. And if you look at the attributes of those devices, some are quite old. They've been around for decades. So the standards that were defined at that point, or the lack of standards, versus where it is today, it's a huge gambit, just if you look at the devices of why there's a problem. The second aspect is people. If you look at healthcare compared to, say, a bank, the people in healthcare aren't as savvy, I would say, around security as people in a bank. So I was recently talking to one of the leaders at the National Health Service in the UK, and he said the silver lining of the recession of 2008 was that all those Lehman banker IT guys, they all moved into healthcare. And so actually you see, for the UK, it's been great that you see all of this great IT knowledge from Lehman and from the banks then moving into healthcare. But I'd say that's, in some ways, is the exception. So I think there's a bit of knowledge that needs to happen in terms of the overall knowledge, and I think that makes healthcare vulnerable. And then I also think if you look at the number of people that are touching these devices, they can be the cleaning staff, they can be clinicians, they can be nurses or doctors that go across many different hospitals. All of them have a different way of what they do. So it's a different standard in terms of the number of people that are involved. I think all of these factors lead to healthcare being much more, and then I think the last one is healthcare, the mission is save lives. It tends to be very collaborative in terms of how people work together. It could be a little bit different than banking, which it's like, all right, we need to be very buttoned up, or the intelligence community or some other industries. But I think healthcare is inherently collaborative, which makes it then inherently exploitable. So I think across these factors, it really makes healthcare kind of a shining star for a hacker to go after.
And if we narrow in just on the health record, if we could have slide number 3, most of us in the room have probably had our credit card or our email account hacked. Pretty low value to the black market, but an electronic health record is actually, what, $100 per record, and increases in value over time, and you can't change what your health is, right? You can't change it like you can your credit card number. And also slide number 5, too.
There is one additional one in there too, and quite frankly, at this point, there's not a lot of money in for a lot of the healthcare providers. You know, your average hospital is 160 bed and has about a $10.6 million annual NOI. It can take you $10.6 million to just buy the tools to become cyber secure.
Yeah.
And so when you start talking about hospitals that have, 24-bed hospital, 24-bed nursing home, my favorite example is, West Park Hospital in Cody, Wyoming. To try to find technology that they can afford, to try to find people that can get there, you just can't do it.
Yeah. If I could just also add a little bit more with respect to some of the challenges,
Sure.
because you had asked me earlier about the legacy equipment, the legacy devices. So, we all change our phones every couple of years. So we change laptops pretty frequently as well. You get the technology's evolving, it's rapidly advancing. That is not the case with respect to medical devices. When they are purchased, the intent isn't for a hospital to replace them every few years. Think about the investment in capital equipment that a hospital makes for CT scans, MRIs, ultrasounds. So the intent is for, number one, that device to be able to stay in use and be performing at its intended use for X number of years, 10 years, 15 years, sometimes even longer than that. So we're faced with this disconnect with respect to these technologies that hospitals have invested in. It becomes a big economic challenge area because trying to bolt on the security or fix the security in these legacy equipment at this stage is far more complex and sometimes really impossible.
It's like taping an airbag onto a Pinto.
Right, right. So, and you've got so you have this tail on that end, and you also have a time frame, a lag with respect to new devices that are in the development phase and design development until they actually come to market because of the necessary testing, meeting versus standards, providing the data, submitting to FDA, and then getting it onto the market. This is a real challenge in this space. So, you had asked what are some of the challenges. We want to throw them out to the audience so they understand why healthcare has some particular unique features and the stakes being quite high with regard to patients' lives.
Well, Suzanne, that's a great point to pivot over to Josh, and I've got to commend you, Josh. I know you're chomping at the bit to get to.
You've held it in well, Josh.
Just because I come from the hacker culture doesn't mean I can't follow some rules.
You've been involved with Suzanne and Kevin as part of the Department of Health and Human Services Cybersecurity Task Force. You've got a report that's going to be out in the next several days. Tell us what your findings are about the state of emergency that we're in.
So we have a visual aid, I believe. I think it's what,
slide number 6.
So the point of this is not to scare people, but the fear is the appropriate response. So Congress actually asked us for this as part of the CISA Act in late 2015. They wanted a 1-year task force for cybersecurity in healthcare. Defined largely not just the devices, but healthcare. We are finished with that report. It would probably be reckless for me to tell you that Politico leaked a copy of that report this morning, so I won't tell you that.
Anyway.
But we're about 2 weeks from formally launching the report, and we added a cover picture to that. So if you can't read the font, I'll just try to summarize verbally. But the headline is "Healthcare Cybersecurity is in Critical Condition." A lot of us on the task force, there's 20 of us from very diverse stakeholder sets. We knew there were problems, and we were top of the class on our various stakeholder types, but none of us knew how bad the problems were, how many problems there were, how deeply they went. And we had to pick the top 5 for this graphic out of 14 uncomfortable truths, but the real short version is there's a severe security talent shortage in healthcare. We can't find a census, but our belief is it's about 85% of modern healthcare delivery organizations don't have a single qualified security person on staff. So Kevin's got a great program, but he's in a minority. If you think of the medium, small, and rural, that's where the real problem lies.
Mayo Clinic is not the average hospital.
Not the average hospital. Number 2.
Not the average clientele either.
No. Right. And number 2, even if you had a security staff, there's a severe legacy technology problem. So many of these operating systems are very old, no longer supported by Microsoft. They're 3 or 4 versions or 5 versions back. Windows XP, which they just end-of-lifed its successor last week, I believe. But it's often a best-case scenario for many of these. So they don't get patches. They're harder to secure. So you're defending things that are harder to make safe. Number 3, and this is an accidental byproduct of well-intended government legislation, but they're hyper-connected and over-connected. I've never used this analogy before, but I will try it. Basically, high-tech encouraged the adoption of the electronic health record to receive and transmit, and they tied reimbursement to a clause called meaningful use. So it took a whole bunch of devices that were never intended to be connected to anything, and it forced them all, if they wanted reimbursement, to be connected to everything. And then what that's led to is very flat, unsegmented networks that are exposed nakedly to the internet in most cases, just because it's really hard to defend things when you can't build walls and moats around them. The analogy I've never used before, which is usually something I don't want to do, it's like taking a car and saying, we want to turn this into a boat or a submarine. You could probably do it if you were going to be paid to, but you would never design a submarine starting with a car chassis, right? So a lot of the technology right now that's hyper-connected is really inappropriate for that purpose. So number 4, these vulnerabilities can affect patient care. I mean, Hollywood Presbyterian shut down patient care for a week and diverted ambulances. Picture yourself in the back of an ambulance, bleeding, or having a heart issue, where seconds matter and you're told you have to go across town in LA, up the block. What if that hospital is also affected by the issue? And then since then, we saw several hospitals in the UK in both November and January, and those are the ones that are public. And then lastly, we know that there's a kind of a known vulnerabilities epidemic in these devices. One particular example had over 1,400 known exploitable flaws in it. So without using jargon, You basically got most organizations don't have anybody to protect them. They're protecting really old things that are almost impossible to protect. They're over-connected and exposed to the internet. A flaw in a single device shut down Hollywood Presbyterian, and the average device has over 1,000. So we've got a very serious situation. And what we want to do is look at the fact that they are target-rich and resource-poor, and they've been prone and they've been prey. What changed in 2016 is we now have predators, right? The predators finally figured it out. Luckily, it's just been financial crime, and we had over $1 billion of ransomware specifically targeting hospitals. But my greater fear, and the task force took this very seriously, is what happens when cyber terrorism or malfeasant actors leverage the same vulnerabilities not to extract money, but to take human life, to be combined with a Boston Marathon bombing and a denial of patient care. So we don't want to use fear tactics, but this becomes a material risk when it's a fifth of our economy. And anything that could trigger a crisis of confidence in the public to trust these, or worse, chief medical officers to retreat from otherwise much better life-saving technology over those concerns. So we have several recommendations I will not go through, but these were some of those really uncomfortable truths. And what we want to do is put in front of this audience, because we respect you, because we're going to need innovators and investors and philanthropists to try to rise to some of these wicked problems.
That's a great transition to let's talk about what the architecture of a set of solutions might look like. If we could show slide number 7, please. The National Institute of Standards and Technology has created a framework for helping to sort of create a system of thinking about the actions at different levels that you can take, both on a prevention, kind of a treatment, and then a restoration standpoint. And maybe Kevin, if you could start by telling us, how does Mayo think about this, and how do you try to use this suite of solutions, and what can we do more broadly to make us better protected?
So we actually believe that you need to follow a standard. Don't make a new one up. There's plenty of standards out there. If you just follow one, you're going to be good. We chose NIST. So really what we're looking at is how do you be able to do that defense in depth idea. You really need to, the days of just a firewall are far, far gone. Be able to start at your perimeter, being able to segment your network, being able to monitor traffic, all the way down to making sure that the devices that you buy are hardened and that the data that you have is encrypted. The challenges, though, as we go forward is that, again, you have a lot of legacy stuff, there's not a lot of money, the stuff can be expensive, and quite frankly, in a healthcare environment, there's tons of special snowflakes. So being able to do things like apply some of the DISA STIGs, which is a secure standard for configurations across your healthcare base, is virtually impossible. To be able to continue to do upgrades, just sort of that simple stuff. If you don't want your house to fall down, the best thing to do is to just continue that small maintenance, make sure the roof's good. So that stuff on all your medical devices, some of that stuff can't be done. So it makes a real challenge. So you end up with a lot of compensating mechanisms, a lot of compensating controls, which adds a fair amount of handcrafting, which can lead to diversity, leads to error, and actually leads to quite a bit of cost. We've
talked a little bit about the white hat hackers, ethical hackers, if you will. There's a slide number 8. Tell us, Mark, kind of how Blackberry is helping its customers to be better prepared for this new environment.
So it's interesting. We acquired probably, I think, 7 companies, close to $1 billion over the last 2.5 years. One of them was a white hat hacking consulting firm. And the reason we did that is we felt that there's a big part of assessment that needs to be done. So we're a technology company. And so I'd also say, if you look at the market, there's a few different big markets that go after this. One is technology. So that is the cybersecurity or security technology market. It's a $75 billion market of hardware and software companies, pretty large. There's an assessment market, and that can be firms that we bought. It could be Accenture, it could be McKinsey, it could be a number of different consulting firms. That's about a $15 billion market. And then there's an emerging insurance market, maybe we'll talk about a little later, that's really like a $2 to $2.75 billion market. So there's all of these vested groups. What we found is that everybody's looking to do assessment because the technology companies want to do the assessment to make sure they understand what the real issue is. The insurance companies want to do the assessment. So you see acquisitions like the ones that Aon has made and many others, that everybody's trying to figure out the assessment part. But all of this is an ecosystem, as we were talking about, that come together to do this. For us, the white hat hackers are good because they'll do everything. So like just as they hacked the medical pump, last year we had them hack something that was more conducive to everybody's environment, which was a coffee pot. So we did the same thing where we gave them a coffee pot, and within a couple weeks they figured out how to hack the coffee pot. And if you know, to Josh's point, everything's interconnected. So if you don't think the next coffee pot you're going to buy is not connected to the internet, it's hard to buy one that's not connected to the internet. So they actually hacked this thing, and they were able to get into the network, and they were able to go through. We set it up as in this case, a bank, but they were able to go through all of the email traffic that was going around, and they could then figure out all of the mergers and acquisition documents and everything by hacking into a coffee pot. They're also the guys that not only do these white hat hackers do that, they also are the ones that put on baseball caps and they try to sneak into hospitals to get into the IT systems. And so they do all of these different approaches. And then my favorite one is we were doing this one audit with these guys, and it was for a hospital in the UK. And what they found was the biomedical group and the IT group didn't really talk. And so what happened is the biomedical group would say, well, we want access, open up a port in the firewall, and we're not going to tell you what it's for, but open it up, and we're not going to tell you how long we need it, but we need it, and that's that. And so the IT organization was like, is it secure? What exactly are you going to do? And they had no recourse around that. So what this group does is it basically goes in and does all of these assessments around how do you identify specific problems. And those problems can be related to a physical device, it can be related to a business process, it can be related to many things, but I think that this assessment component is actually quite important. And then I also think that doing things like the hackathons and getting more of that community involved in it in a very organic way, I think is also quite valuable in terms of how we think about this. Like it's a group that you want to engage in terms of figuring this out. In part, like Josh, they have a passion for it, so they will throw themselves into hacking something. And if that means getting that knowledge into a device manufacturer before they actually, build out the device, all the better.
So we as well have, actually I've got 4 on my staff. So we provide pre-purchase assessments.
You're not typical.
I know. I'm not in the least.
He's a snowflake himself.
Yes, we are a special snowflake. And so those gentlemen do pre-purchase assessments on a lot of these devices. The way that we've been able to be most productive is that we actually partner with most of the vendors. So when we do it, we actually ask the vendor to come on site. They'll send somebody there. They'll spend a week setting it up with us. We'll have the engineer there while we do this, so they see exactly what we're doing. They know that we aren't cheating. We're able to show them what the impacts are, and then we're able to provide them the documentation all the way down to what they need to be able to do to recreate some of these. For the most part, the vendors have been collaborative and understanding.
Right. The other element of protection is a kind of a new product that is an emerging product in the insurance market. And I know Josh has some comments on that, but we'll let Mark just describe it a little bit about this new type of cyber insurance.
So if anybody was at RIM's conference in Philadelphia last week, Risk Insurance Managers Conference, you see, and I don't know if any people here from the insurance business, but you see a massive market where they're looking to get into this space. And you also see that it's relatively nascent. So what was great in 2015 when all of the big hacks were coming out, premiums were skyrocketing. Why were premiums skyrocketing? Because they were all priced wrong. And so there's a bit of knowledge that is still kind of going on in insurance in terms of cybersecurity. But you see that, and you definitely got it last week in Philadelphia, that the market is moving quickly to people looking to buy this type of insurance. The thing that we did, we announced 2 weeks ago a partnership with Allied World. So what we'll do is we'll do we'll take a month-long assessment and we'll boil it down to an hour and a half. And we think that if you can fill out an hour and a half survey, you will actually identify what are the key vulnerabilities that you have within your organization as it relates to cyber. And so what we're doing is that we're offering that to all of Allied World's customers so that they can be smarter about cyber. And it also is then advantageous for Allied World that they can be smarter about how to price cyber. I think what this gets to, and it's a point Kevin made, it's all around, in a way, standards, but it's standards as it relates, it's kind of loosely describing standards, which is how do insurance companies begin to get the right set of information to then price? And then how do the people that are looking to buy insurance get smarter about answering the questions in the way that will lower their premiums? So if it's saying you need a CISO on staff, that makes a big difference. Or what, if you can start to go down the list of questions that will make a difference to lower your premiums, there becomes an economic incentive to do it, but then there also becomes a common vernacular of how do people think about it. Different than standards as it relates to technology, but it's kind of an analogous way of beginning to solve this problem.
And as we were looking at this issue, I identified a survey that 53% of healthcare institutions have taken out these cybersecurity policies, while 88% of financial institutions have the same type of coverage. So again, another way that healthcare is perhaps behind the curve, but I know Josh has some concerns about maybe an over-reliance on these type of products.
I'm going to be very terse just for the interest of time. This could be a panel on it into itself. But I'm deeply involved in these as well. Insurance will play a vital role. Do not bank on it right now. A few caveats to what we've just described, and this is a broader cyber insurance point, not specific to healthcare. Right now, most of the premiums are covering credit card monitoring, notifying your customers that they lost their credit card, the lawyer fees, and the crisis management fees. It's incredibly narrow. It doesn't cover loss of life in a hospital clinical environment.
Brand damage.
Or brand damage, or intellectual property. The kind of things they cover are incredibly narrow. When we say cyber insurance, you're thinking all things cyber. They're very narrow. Number two, if you look at the $1 billion+ of ransomware that hospitals paid in 2016, none of them were covered. Or they might have been covered by an accidental director and officer or general liability program aside from any cyber, but a $17,000 payout doesn't even clear the deductible on some of these. So there's a lot of work to be done. A precursor to cyber insurance being meaningful is we don't even have proper liability assigned in software. The only thing in the US or even globally that there's no liability law for is software. So if there's harm due to a software flaw, currently for the last 30 years since the Therac 25 deaths in medical, there isn't any, and that's being challenged more recently. The Presidential Commission on Enhancing National Cybersecurity is starting to ask, what's the state of the law with regards to IoT and software and harm? We believe there's no statutory appetite to introduce software liability, but we also believe strongly that we'll have a fatality, and the family and the judge and the jury will have a reasonable expectation that harm caused their loved one due to software flaws no different than harm caused by a defective physical product. So we will see some form of software liability, and that's really when I work with the insurers. They will conform and price and craft products for the manufacturers, the hospitals, the patients, after those liability things settle down. So it will play a role. It's just going to be a subservient role, and it's not there yet. It's very far from there yet.
Can't let it give you a false sense of security.
That's
Just
right.
because you have car insurance doesn't mean you get to drive like a maniac.
Well, exactly. And I'm with you. My only rebuttal, because I think that there's value to it, and I agree. Like the key is you don't want to use it. You don't want to be hacked. So you're not saying you're gonna. It's not a moral hazard issue that you're willing to bear more risk now that you have insurance. But I do think that there's an interesting, it's like a positive externality of the whole thing is you will start to see people starting to have a common vernacular of how they think about the topic, which I think is beneficial.
They're at the table. Yeah.
So let's see if any of you have questions. Yes?
I have a question. So we have a microphone for you? What?
A microphone coming from the back.
Oh, okay.
Alicia's on her way.
Bingo Ladiji from Casey Family Programs. So we live in a world where we are all wearing devices and everything, and I'm just wondering that from a consumer perspective, is it going to get to a point in time that as you are buying your virus protection for your computer, that you have to buy it also for your heart monitor and things like that. How should we think about that? And when it comes to the liability of that, will that be transferred to the consumer, or is it going to be something that that the producer will bear? So just thinking about that and whether you guys have thought about it.
So can I just say quick?
Sure. Yep.
This is one of the things we were talking about earlier before of the killer app syndrome. There will never be something that you can buy to do antivirus for your wearables that'll solve all your security problems for whatever. So yes, that may be there, but it won't solve the problem. You have to go all the way back to the design phase of what's the intent, how is the security going to work on this, what are the threat scenarios, and build that all the way through maintenance and end of life on that product.
But you raise a great question, because I do think from a technology perspective, like at Blackberry, we have 5 tenets of how we think about security software. And you hit basically the first one, which is it needs to be end-to-end. The more you can make an end-to-end solution, the counter would be a patchwork of many different technologies coming together to solve it. If you use the patchwork approach, the challenge is it's where those connections are that tend to be the most vulnerable. So having it to be closer to end-to-end is quite important. But to your point of bringing in a very much a consumer device and thinking that the hospital would be somehow accountable or liable for that, might be a bit of a stretch.
Josh?
We want to flip this on its head. I think most people trust technology and assume it's trustworthy. When we formed the Cavalry, our problem statement was verbatim. We said our dependence on connected technology is growing faster than our ability to secure it. And the reason we chose dependence is if you're depending on undependable things, we can either depend upon them less or make them more dependable. And the idea that the 50 IoT devices in your home will each get a $50 license for antivirus when it fails about 100% in the banks, it's just not economic, it's not scalable, it's not effective. What we've seen is that if you look at the Fortune 100, all of them have lost intellectual property or trade secrets in spite of $80 billion of spend on product and double that on staff. So the failure rate's about 100%. We don't actually know how to secure things. So if you put that in the context of these safety critical areas, the answer is not going to be throw more money in it and aftermarket. They will play a role, but the answer is we need sane, informed dependence models. Where should we depend on it, and where is it foolish to depend upon it?
Any other?
Does that mean your coffee pot's not hooked up to the internet, John?
You know, yeah, exactly.
You know the joke that reveals, by the way? Richard A. Clarke, former cyber czar, had this infamous joke that if you're spending more per year on your coffee budget than on your cybersecurity, not only will you be hacked, you deserve to be. But this could be a literal.
Exactly, exactly.
Right. Well, there's also, it's interesting because one of the lead authors of the NIST cybersecurity framework will always state that the reason, of the 5 core functions that you had on that previous slide, identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover, what you'll note, which some people might consider glaringly missing, but it's a purposeful omission, is prevent. Mm-hmm. Okay, and that is because implicit within the 5 core functions is the understanding that you're never going to be at 0 in terms of being able to prevent. So it's assuming, it's the understanding that we do our best as far as designing new technologies, and from the FDA standpoint, when we're talking about within the medical device space, that rigorous, continuous monitoring, that vigilance that's needed throughout the product life cycle, so that detection, identification and detection of vulnerabilities that will continue to emerge throughout the lifespan of that device can be appropriately assessed and addressed and mitigated or remediated as expediently as possible. But again, it comes back to we can't get risk down to 0. It's what is considered to be acceptable, and it's with the understanding that you're never going to eliminate every possible breach or intrusion or exploit.
One of our documents for the Cavalry, when working deeply with folks on this stage, was we call it the Hippocratic Oath for Connected Medical Devices. And a core assumption of these 5 things is that all systems fail. So we're starting with the belief it's going to fail. But without using the fancy names, it says, tell your customers how you avoid failure. That's a safety by design. Tell tell people tell willing allies you'll take help avoiding failure without suing them. That's working with white hat ethical hackers. How do you capture, study, and learn from failure? So logging. How do you have a prompt and agile response to inoculate against future failures? That's the ability to update. And how do you contain and isolate failure to prevent cascading failures? So those are like segmentation, isolation. We start with the assumption that every one of these medical devices will fail, and with Suzanne's pre-market and post-market guidance and the precedent they've been setting with recalls and safety communications, we're trying to steer the future medical supply that way.
So in the last few minutes that we have together before we hear from President Bush, I'm going to ask each of my panelists to give us an action step that listeners here can take when they leave the room, either at the personal, individual level to make themselves more prepared and protected from these kinds of things, not fully protected, but more aware anyway, or maybe at the institutional or sector level, or as a national policy step, or even as global citizens. So ladies first. Suzanne, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you. So I'll start a conversation. One of the clear gaps that we have identified in the past few years is that there's very much a lack of awareness, of understanding of the potential risks involved with these technologies. And we need to be able to arm our patients and clinicians and really everyone within the ecosystem with sufficient understanding, with the ability to talk in a manner that is understood across all parties in order to not only raise awareness, but then to empower decision making. One of our key strategic priorities at FDA Center for Devices and Radiological Health right now is partner with patients. Partnering with patients being a key driver to a lot of the initiatives, the efforts that we are doing with respect to direct patient engagement. And once more, informing and empowering patients so that they have the right, enough of an understanding so that they can ask the right questions of their physicians in terms of making informed decisions with respect to their care, interventions, diagnostics, therapeutics, whatever that might be. So this expands beyond patients to providers and to the broader population as well. We hear a lot on the sensational side in terms of the media, but I think that it's more important for everyone to have a better grasp on what the benefits and risks are, have an understanding of the security concerns, and how we can do better to really push the momentum, get more momentum around creating awareness and rigor around medical device cybersecurity.
Great, thanks, Suzanne. Josh?
I would love to be able to tell you that you should ask for these security features and then you'll be safe, or talk to your doctor. There won't be an easy fix. I think one real big catalyst is please look for and read the coverage on that Congressional Task Force report that's coming out in, we believe, 2 weeks. And like I said, it may have been leaked by Politico this morning. But for this room in particular, for the kind of crowd that comes to the Milken event, you're innovators, you're investors, you're philanthropists. I identified a few of the wicked problems, unsolved and as of yet seemingly unsolvable problems. There's tremendous opportunity, not just for public safety, not for your own family's well-being, but there's commercial opportunity here as well. When someone figures out how to scale these technologies to cash-strapped, target-rich hospital environments, we're going to need the best and brightest, and many of them are in this room. So my call to action would be get more informed, learn up, but also look at this as an opportunity we can rise to. This isn't just public safety. This is a fifth of our economy. This has massive national security implications. And I know the folks in this room have the mettle and the interest to try to do something about that, and we're happy to partner.
Mark?
So what do you say after this? So I would say, okay, so this will sound like a commercial. It's not intended to be, but if you're in a spot where you take the Blackberry 90-minute survey and figure out, is your organization secure or not? There's nothing like a little knowledge to be dangerous with, and knowing whether you're vulnerable or not can go a long way. So get more informed from that perspective. And then I think it is to drive a bit of a conversation. So I think that a great point is we were talking to one of a device manufacturer that we work with, and we said, well, why aren't you more secure? And their response is, well, we're not really asked to be by our customers. Like if the customers were really asking for it, then we would do it. It's just how we allocate the investment of our R&D. So I think that having more of that, having the IT organization or the CISO being able to put into the RFP for these products security requirements, I think is critical. But I think the very first thing is just go and fill out, know where you're most vulnerable. If you're on a board or if you're with an organization, have them do these surveys and figure out where they're vulnerable to figure out if there's real risk for the organization.
Great. Kevin, we'll give you the last word.
I'll be really quick. One is just to integrate cybersecurity into healthcare's culture of safety. This is one more thing that you have to think about. The right meds at the right time, the right dose. Are you cyber secure? The second one is in the interim, go take a look at the critical security controls. There's 5 or 6 simple things, not easy, but simple things you can do to dramatically reduce your risk.
Terrific. So I want to thank my panelists not only for the past 60 minutes and helping us better understand this topic, but for the work you do 24/7 year-round to help raise the visibility of these issues and help us all be better prepared and informed and protected. So thanks to all of you for being with us, and let's head to lunch.